So the 2026 World Cup just wrapped up on Sunday with Spain beating Argentina in the final, and I can honestly say that the best team won. This World Cup certainly gave us a lot to talk about. I'm Dr. Richard Bucciarelli, fitness coach, sports scientist, and owner of the Speed Training Lab and High Performance Center. And today I'm going to talk about the 5 lessons or takeaways from this past World Cup and make it make sense. So the first lesson or thing that I took away from this past World Cup is that honestly, every team is playing the same. This is something that anyone from my generation and definitely previous generations that watched international tournaments like this feels a bit new to. And that's because back in the day, we would have honestly been able to see very clearly the difference between styles of play from different countries. For example, a Brazilian style, a Dutch style, a German style, and we might even be able to watch a team playing that way and instantly recognize it as that particular style. But now what we're seeing is that every team is not maybe necessarily even playing the same way, but they're capable of playing in the same way and in different ways, but all teams are able to sort of do all of the different things. To give a few examples, almost all of the national teams in this tournament were able to defend with a low block and a mid block when needed. And if they had to, at times during games, they were also able to press high and win the ball in the opponent's third. At the same time, teams were able to defend deep and then counter, or they were able to attack with a possession-based style, playing higher up the field and trying to keep the ball and open up spaces against their opposition that they can later exploit. Typically, historically, teams would only use 1 or 2 of those styles, and really you'd be able to recognize it right away. And honestly, I think that the reason that this is all changing is for 2 things. The first is globalization, which means that now we've got countries that are bringing in players from all over the world, and we've got the sharing of ideas happening all over the world. And the second thing, which is kind of in keeping with that, is the use of technology. So now we have the ability to watch videos of basically whatever game we want, anywhere we want, all over the world. Coaches, fitness coaches, performance analysts, all of them have access to this technology right at their fingertips. And so everyone can watch, everyone can analyze, and everyone can learn what works and what doesn't. And sometimes when I discuss this stuff, it reminds me of the book called Soccernomics by Stefan Szymanski and Simon Cooper. And they discussed this concept that there was sort of like a style of play which they ended up kind of naming after the Western European countries, many of them, let's say France, Holland, Belgium, even Germany, Italy, and that when they would watch major tournaments in the last few years or even the last decade, a lot of teams tended to play that way. They would be able to keep the ball when they needed to. They could counter very efficiently when they wanted. But if and when they needed to drop back or back away from high pressure, they were also able to do that. And so now we're not only seeing Western European teams doing it, we're seeing teams from literally all over the world do it. And the result is that now, we've got a lot more parity. Teams that you might have really thought were an underdog in this World Cup, Cabo Verde is just one example, but there's others. They've been able to have success against even some of the giants of the game. And, we haven't really seen a lot of blowouts or really big score lines as a result. So there's a lot more parity. And in addition to that, I think what that leads to is that ultimately a lot of these teams, I mentioned Brazil, Holland, Germany, that we used to associate with a certain style. Well, now those teams aren't playing with that style anymore. They're all kind of doing the same thing. They're showing versatility in the sense that they can change their strategy and tactics when they need to, but they're all playing the same way. And ultimately, what that means in terms of the game and the future of the game is that if everybody's playing the same way with an organized defense and ability to counter, ability to back off, all of it, well, then the difference makers are going to be the special players, the talented players, the really brilliant players that are so technically good and so, let's say, skilled at thinking ahead, that they can break down a game, break down an organized defense, even when everything seems to be going against them. And so we see that with, let's say, France as an example. Of course, they certainly have more than one talented player, but they had players that were able to, even when they weren't playing very well, to just have a moment of brilliance, just take control of the game, score a goal, and they ended up winning. And lots of other teams, I think, can kind of fall into that category. If everyone's playing the same, everyone's well organized, everyone's versatile, everyone's fit, we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, well, then it's going to be those brilliant players that make the difference. I'm going to add a caveat to that, though, which is that everyone plays the same except Spain. And I'll also say it in a different way, which is that, none of these countries seem to have like a real national style of play anymore, also except for Spain. And ironically, Spain is the one team that won the whole thing. But what I will say is that if any team has still kind of retained their traditional style of play, at least the traditional style that Spain has been using for the past couple of decades, it is Spain. And so they're, when you watch them play, they didn't do it all the time, but they were able to maintain this sort of very short passing, very fluid movement off the ball from the midfielders, all of the midfielders, even when they're in tight spaces, being able to get in between the lines of defenders, being patient in possession, and eventually just tiring out the opponent and opening up spaces to exploit. They're still doing that. That is still the Spanish style. And they're maybe the only ones that are really sticking to that consistently and sticking to their own style consistently. No other team is doing it. And as I said, ironically, everyone plays the same except them, but they're the ones that won the whole thing. I think as well, this idea that a brilliant player or a really talented player is the only one that's capable of breaking down a game, I do believe that holds true, except in the case of Spain. They've got lots of talented players, but it's hard to point to one in the Spanish team that was like the real brilliant special player that took control, maybe the way that Haaland did for Norway, or I mentioned, let's say, Mbappe for France, or other players like that. Spain, they did get goals from several players, but really, to play that way, the way that they want to play, you need very, very skilled technical players in every position, and you need very smart players in every position. And of course, you also need a coach that can really keep the team organized. Spain had all of that. I think it may even be almost unrealistic for any of us. I mean, I'm speaking here in Canada, but anyone around the world to try to copy that style, unless we have those kind of players, and we'll see if we're ever going to be able to develop that or not. But outside of Spain, the first lesson from this World Cup for me is that everyone's playing the same. And I think we can expect more of that in the years to come in the World Cups. So lesson and takeaway number 2 is that for me in this World Cup, these rule changes that have been implemented just aren't working. And it's a little bit of a cliche expression, but I'm going to use it here. And that is that the cure is worse than the disease with these rule changes. I'm going to speak about 2 in particular, which are, different rule changes. They've been implemented for different reasons, but ultimately the result of both of these rule changes has been the same. And that result is that we are disrupting the one thing that makes our sport, I think, the most exciting and the most entertaining to fans. And that is the rhythm and the flow of the games. And we're disrupting it with these rule changes. And the first one I'm going to talk about, it's not new to this tournament, but it's certainly played a big role in this tournament, and that's VAR. So the rationale for VAR, I get it. I'm sure lots of other coaches and professionals in the game totally understand that there's been historically, lots of times where controversial calls have been made or not made. Things like whether or not a ball crossed the line and a goal was scored, fouls in the penalty box that were or were not given, cards, things like that do decide the outcome of games. And we can think back to maybe Frank Lampard's goal for England that he scored against Germany back in 2010 as an example of that. But and by the way, that goal was not allowed at the time, but if there was VAR, it probably would have been, and might have changed the outcome of the game anyway. But clearly there's a rationale for video replay. Clearly there's good reason to think that video replay can really help. The referee can't always see all the little details. Sometimes when there's fouls or contact, players will play act and make a meal out of a tackle where they're not hurt and try to play for a foul or a card or whatever. We know that these things happen. The issue with VAR, though, is that, again, when I say the cure is worse than the disease, even though it has helped, and it has helped sometimes, in fact, they go through the review and just because it's ultimately still up to the referee and the team of referees' decision. There's still human error and there's subjectivity involved. But in any case, even if it does help, and even if it did help all the time, the end result is that you get a real big delay in the games. And sometimes that delay, like, it ends up being 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, where, man, these referees are just staring at a screen. All the players are standing still, and it ruins that one thing that just makes our sport so popular, which is the rhythm and the flow. And I did a video where I talked a little bit about this, and I sort of rehashed the argument made by Roy Keane, famous pundit, famous former player with Manchester United and Ireland, and he said it too. He said that, like, with our sport, the one thing that really makes it special and why people like to watch is that they get this feeling like they don't even want to go to the bathroom during a game because they don't want to miss anything. You don't have that when you watch hockey. You don't have that when you watch American football. There's all kinds of breaks and timeouts and things. And so, we lose that a little bit with VAR. The cure is worse than the disease. And then the next rule change, which I know it's not new to this World Cup, but, it's been implemented across the board at this tournament. And I'm not a fan of it at all, and that is the hydration breaks. And I'm almost feel like I need to use air quotes when I say hydration breaks, because sure, there's a good rationale for giving players a break to hydrate. I'm a fitness coach, I'm a sports scientist, I've done this at the highest levels. I've been to the Women's World Cup, the Pan American Games in the heat in CONCACAF, and I know how important it is. I've even studied this stuff. So I'm certainly not someone to downplay the importance of hydration. But the truth is that if we really wanted to make, rules or hydration breaks or whatever centered around players' health, well, then we would put some thresholds or protocols in place to say, hey, if the temperature goes, let's say, above 30 degrees, above 35 degrees, that kind of thing. If there's a certain threshold with regards to humidity, or maybe temperature and humidity, like if it's really hot or humid, fine, we'll throw those breaks in there. But to just have like a blanket rule where no matter what, at the middle of the first half, at the middle of the second half, even we saw in this World Cup, games that were played at night, games that were played in the rain, games that were played, in some cities where at the time of the game, the temperature was like 18 degrees Celsius. There's no need for that extra break for hydration. And, we have to be honest here. Hydration simply means a player, walking to wherever a bottle is on the bench and taking a couple of sips. It doesn't have to take 3+ minutes. That's a delay in the action, and it's a disruption of the rhythm and the flow of the game. And, why did I put air quotes when I said hydration breaks? It's because we all really know the real reason behind why these breaks are being put into the game, and that's because they're commercial breaks. They allow for FIFA and the other federations and everyone involved, right, the advertisers, to make money. And, in keeping with that theme, we've seen what happened with ticket prices at this tournament and the prices for all the concessions and beer and this and that. And it's very clear that FIFA has realized any way that they can to make money, anything they can do, they'll do it, regardless of how it affects the game and regardless of how it affects the fans. And, I don't want to come off as being ironic, because the fan support was excellent. The stadiums were full. Everybody watched on TV. I watched on TV. As upset as I was about some of this stuff, I watched as many games as I could. And so people are still tuning in. People are still turning out. People are still spending money. But I think these disruptions to the flow and the rhythm of the game, at some point, they're going to start to turn off fans. And anyway, I'm not a fan. The cure is worse than the disease. So the takeaway and lesson from the World Cup number 3 for me is that fitness and sports science are here to stay, whether anybody likes it or not. Okay, I'm going to talk about fitness first, and keep in mind, it's a tournament. It's played over a relatively short period of time. And anytime you have that type of format, well, the importance of players being fit and, of course, being able to manage the load and the risk of injury, all that, well, that's already there. And in this tournament in particular, it's bigger. We ended up with an extra knockout game, the round of 32. So I mentioned that, let's say, Spain and Argentina that got to the final, well, they had to play 8 games instead of 7. So that's an extra game, extra physical and physiological load. In addition to that, the changes that have been made to the format, looking like they're going to also start to be more consistent. Well, they were there here too. This tournament was played in 3 countries. So there was lots of travel. I mean, even imagine our Canadian national team as hosts, right? We had to play in Toronto. And then everyone had to get on a plane and fly across the continent to BC, and it's a different time zone. And that, Canada wasn't the only team that had to experience that. So there's a sort of an extra load, physiological load with respect to the extra game. There's an extra load with respect to the extra travel in multiple countries and multiple time zones. And there's also an extra load, not everywhere, but in some places, including in Mexico, with regards to altitude. So, we have to understand that Mexico City, the Azteca Stadium, I mean, I've been there with the national team as a fitness coach, and even as a youth player, I actually played, I didn't play in Azteca Stadium, but I did play a tournament in Mexico City, so I've experienced it more than once. When you play at altitude, Mexico City is 2,000 meters above sea level. Well, the partial pressure of oxygen in the air is lower. The air is thinner, literally less oxygen available to the athletes. And to acclimatize to that, in the best case scenario, it would take about a month, maybe even up to 6 weeks. So that's not practical. And of course, that means that the teams, England is an example, but the teams that had to play against Mexico in this tournament, well, they're at a significant physiological disadvantage for that reason. Okay, and then as if all of that weren't enough, well, this being a tournament in North America and FIFA and everyone else involved wanting to make sure that they were able to get these games in front of not just the North American audience, but also the European audience. Well, that means that the games had to be played often either at 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 noon, or, kind of in the hottest period of the day, 1, 2, 3 o'clock p.m. North American time. And again, that's to accommodate the European audience, because if you don't play them in the afternoon here in North America, well, then they're going to be at 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in Europe. And, you can't make any money with that. So what did we have, like all things considered, in terms of the fitness and the demands on players' fitness? Well, more games, more travel, altitude, and heat. It's a significant physiological strain on players. And so the fitness level of the players, the importance of getting them physically prepared, I think it's never been higher. And it's looking like we're still going to keep going with these shared hosts. And, I know next time is going to be Portugal, Spain, Morocco. In fact, geographically, they're tighter, they're closer together, but still you're going to have these issues with travel and extra games and all that. So fitness it was already important. It's going to become more important. And the truth is that those countries, and I'm going to include Canada in this too, okay, those countries that don't invest, even with the youth, bringing in competent fitness coaches and sports scientists and really properly preparing players, we need to properly prepare them also in our domestic professional leagues so that they're getting enough games and enough load and properly periodized and all of it, right? If we don't do it, and if other countries don't do it, then we are going to get left behind physically. And to build upon that, well, like, it's not just the fitness, and that's here to stay, let's say. It's also sports science. And I want to call attention to one interesting statistic. Funny enough, I didn't hear a lot of the commentators talk about it a lot. I wonder maybe if not all of them actually exactly understand it. And that's the statistic that we kept on seeing and was presented in every game, and that's momentum. So I'm not going to pretend that I understand all the math, but I actually have one of my best friends, a colleague of mine that's doing research on this stuff out in Portugal, Farzad Yousefian. He's finishing up his PhD, and he and the group of researchers that he's working with, they're one of many, but in any case, they've been studying and using both video and GPS analysis to quantify momentum that is produced and then sometimes sustained, but sometimes, kind of dropped off and switched between one team and the opponent. But they're quantifying team momentum. And I'm sure anyone who's listening to this, like, you'll remember seeing that stat up on the screen. And, quite often you would see that when one team had sort of a sustained period of momentum, well, what happened? They got more scoring opportunities, they scored more goals, and often the goals which were preceded by momentum, those are the moments that put them ahead and let them win the game. So, we're studying this stuff and we're quantifying it. And as I said, I have friends and colleagues from Canada that left Canada, and are now studying and contributing to this body of research outside of Canada. And so again, just like I said with fitness, like if we don't do better, especially with elite youth, professional academies, and the youth national teams, all of these levels, if we don't bring in competent sports scientists to bring this information and this level of comprehensive data analysis, studying momentum and trying to figure out ways that you can adjust training and tactics and all of that to try to maximize it or get it to peak at certain levels. Well, if we don't do that, we're also going to be left behind. We will be left behind based on fitness and sports science against those countries that take it more seriously than we do. And I think that's definitely an important lesson and takeaway from this tournament. So with that being said, the fourth lesson and takeaway that I got from the World Cup, in fact, is that despite the importance of fitness and sports science, and I'll stick up for that for as long as I'm breathing, but despite the importance of all of that, okay, the best athletes are not the ones that win. The teams with the best athletes are not the ones that win in the end. The teams that win are the teams that have the best decision makers, individually and as a group. Something I noticed online, and I'll have to admit I probably spent more time than I should have reading all the different Twitter discussions, or I guess we're calling them X now, but in any case, all the discussions, the arguments, the debates centered around this concept. And in fact, it was much more coming from people from the United States. But I'll say that I have heard similar things in Canada, and I'm certainly aware that this is relevant to Canada too. But basically the argument and the discussion was centered around this idea, which is that if the United States men's team just had their best athletes playing soccer instead of playing football, basketball, baseball, etc., the more traditional American sports, if they only had their best athletes playing soccer, well, then they'd win the World Cup. Now, I did comment on this before, but I think it's important to be said from the beginning. This is nonsense. The only possible way that we could try to give some credence to that argument would be if we said, well, we're defining the best athlete as simply the person who is better at the sport than everybody else. And what I mean by that is we could use LeBron James as an example. Well, he's maybe not anymore, he's a little older now, but for a long time he was the best basketball player in the world, literally the best at that sport in the whole world, okay? And so America produces people like that are the best at basketball, the best at football in the whole world. And so if those guys, because they're so good at their sport, if they decided to play soccer or whatever, well, maybe you could argue they could be better as a national team. I don't even agree with it, but I'm saying that's the only possible way that you could interpret that argument and say that it has any validity. Okay, I don't agree with it anyway. But regardless, if we look at just, again, the definition of best athlete, well, the best athlete means the one who's the fastest, the strongest, the most powerful, sort of all those physical qualities. And this is coming from a fitness coach and a sports scientist. I do this every day and I've been doing it for my whole career for almost 30 years now. So I'm not one to downplay the importance of this, but I have to say that we can look at the US men's national team, we can look at the Canadian men's national team, the French, the English, whoever it is, okay? They didn't lose, none of them, right? They didn't lose because they didn't have the best athletes. They didn't lose because they got outrun or outcompeted physically. All of them, and every team, okay, that loses in this tournament and even in previous tournaments in this sport, okay, they lose because they make more mistakes than the opposition. They make more incorrect decisions than the opposition. It's decisions and the decision makers that decide the outcome of games. The way that I think everyone involved in the sport really needs to look at these athletic qualities, speed, strength, agility, whatever it is, right? Those athletic qualities, of course you need to train them. Of course you need to get them up to the highest standard possible. And in fact, sometimes you should even recruit players that are faster. No problem, fine. But those abilities, those are a means to an end, okay? What does that mean? That means that if a player is faster, okay, then he or she can get to a better position quicker. But the decision to get to that position is what's more important than the speed to get them there. And then if we, expand that out and we say, well, okay, it's not just about an individual being able to make better decisions, but as a group, well, again, if the whole team is a little bit faster than the opposition, they can shift and adjust and get their whole team into the better position faster. But it's the decision to shift and adjust and do that on the fly, right? Again, one of the reasons why we all love this sport so much is the variability in the actions on the field. There's 22 players, a large space, and there's very limited rules in terms of movement other than offside and out of bounds or whatever. It's different than other sports, and that means there's much more variability in what can happen. It's a dynamic system. In fact, the analysis of this stuff is the same way that we get these analyses of momentum. So in any case, that's why we love the sport, and what it requires from players is constant decision making, constant. So we in Canada don't need better athletes to win. The United States doesn't need better athletes to win. We didn't lose to Morocco. I'll get to this point later in more detail. We didn't lose to Morocco because we weren't as good athletes as them. The United States didn't lose to Belgium because of a lack of athletic ability. And for that matter, France didn't lose to Spain because of athletic ability. England didn't lose to Argentina because of athletic ability. You could argue that in all of those cases, probably the team with the better athletes, right? I'm talking Canada, Morocco. I'm talking USA, Belgium. I'm talking France and Spain, and England and Argentina. In all four, the team with the better athletes, with the players that were faster, stronger, more powerful, lost. Why? Because speed is a means to an end. Decision making is what wins games. And this is coming from a guy, my business is called speed training. I mean, we do this every day. I know how important it is to be able to run fast, but it's not the most important thing in soccer. Thinking and decision making is. So I think that point leads well into my final takeaway from this World Cup, which is, I think maybe it's a little more personal, hits a little bit more closer to home, both for me as a Canadian who's worked in the game with the national teams at the highest level, and also as a fan of the team. And probably this maybe will resonate a bit more even with the Canadians that are maybe watching or listening to this. And that is that the better team, okay, so the better team, whatever we want to call that or use that title in our heads, okay? The better team is the one that wins. And the team that wins is the team that does two things specifically better than their opponents. Number one, they make less mistakes than their opponents. Again, it ties in directly with what I said before about decision making. And the second thing is the team that wins, the better team, is also the one that is able or better able to capitalize on the mistakes of their opponents. Keep that in mind. So it's nothing against Jesse Marsch as a coach. In fact, I think he's done a great job as a coach of our national team. Since he's taken over, Canada has gone up in our FIFA rankings. We've had success relative to what we are used to, because again, success is sort of a relative term, but we've had success in the Copa America, even a little bit of success in the Gold Cup, and we had success at the World Cup. We never won a game before. We never even had a point in a World Cup before. And we got all the way through out of the group, a knockout round win, deserved knockout round win against South Africa, and moments against Morocco where we did play better than them. Moments where we did, especially in the first half, okay? So it's nothing against the coach, and of course, nothing against the team. Some of them are friends and former clients of mine too that I used to train when they were kids. So I think overall there's a lot of positive there, okay? But this concept of, a coach at the end of a game where you lost 3-0 coming out and saying we were the better team, I get why he's doing it. I understand that. I think he's trying to galvanize fans, Canadian fans and coaches and players and everyone, and galvanize and get everybody excited and pumped up about the team, again, which is historically successful. He's trying to be positive and optimistic. I get that. But I think also in our sport, we need to always balance this positivity, this optimism, everything. We need to balance it against reality, against being realistic, and also even against a little bit of humility. Okay, and this is what I would say, I've commented a little bit on it before. I've taken quite a lot of criticism online. I don't care. There's been support and criticism too, but I don't care if I get criticized about this, because the truth is that when you travel around the world, and especially when you work in the game outside of North America, outside of this environment, which is a real, a heavy environment on the positivity side of things, a heavy environment around participation trophies and self-esteem and making everyone feel special all the time. It's really unique to North America. There's other countries that do it, but it's really unique to Canada and the United States. And when you work in the game, I spent a whole year working in a professional club in Uruguay. With my research, I've traveled and attended conferences literally all over the world. And when I was with the national team too, I was fortunate to get to travel all over the world and meet and talk to coaches and fitness coaches and players and from all over the world. And the more you get exposed to people at the high level of the game in other countries, the more you realize that there is a certain, it's almost like a reverence, a respect, a real high level of respect that people have for the game. That respect goes, there's a self-respect that people have. There's certainly a respect for opponents. And then on top of that, there's an esteem and a respect and a reverence that everyone has for the game. And I think part of that, you lose a bit of that when you stop being honest, especially in situations like this, where it's like you say, we were the better team, and then you say, I'd rather be us than them. I know why he's saying it. I get it. It's positivity, it's optimism, whatever. But it comes off as a little bit disingenuous, and it comes off as, a little bit of disrespectful, not just to the opponent. I think it comes off a little bit as disrespectful to the national team, because it's like you're telling them, hey, you were the better team even though you lost. And then on top of that, it comes off a little bit as disrespectful to the game. And a lot of people from around the world, like you saw commentary from the pundits from England, from Belgium, from Germany, of course from Morocco, from the opposing coach, right? How do you think it feels? How do you think they interpret that when they just beat you? And you say, we were better, and you say, I'd rather be me than be you. Well, it comes off a little, it leaves a little bit of a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And again, lots of support here in Canada, even support for that statement and that whole idea and that whole ideology. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's the right way. I think we need to balance optimism with reality and with pragmatism. And me personally, I would have liked to have seen something more along the lines of, yes, I think we outplayed them in the first half. Yes, we had some good chances to score, and unfortunately we didn't capitalize on them. But they got the better of us in the second half. We weren't good enough on that set piece. And then we weren't good enough stopping their counterattacks. And we need to do better at that, and we will do better at that. And I think if he comes out and says something like that instead of what he did say, I think then you maintain that level of respect and that reverence for the game. I think he's a good coach. I think he's a competent coach. I think he's proven that he's capable of getting results. He can do better. All of that is true, okay? And at the same time, it's also true. Canada were not the better team. Morocco was the better team. Go back to what I said, right? The team that is better is the team that makes less mistakes, and then that capitalizes on their opponent's mistakes. You could argue that Canada made 3 critical mistakes in that game: the defending on the set piece, and then of course the giveaways and the poor defending, let's say in transition after they had committed players forward 3 times. What did Morocco do? They scored 3 goals. So they capitalized on those mistakes. And this is the way we need to balance optimism, positivity, with pragmatism and reality. And I think the more that we as a nation start to qualify for World Cups and start to have some sustained success, I think we got to get away from this sort of cheerleading side of things and this participation trophy mentality. We got to give praise where it's warranted, but we got to also give honest, constructive, and fair criticism where it's warranted, and we need to show respect for our opponents. Okay, so that wraps up the World Cup post-mortem, except for the last little segment that I want to get into, which is, as a nation, where do we go from here? And so I've got a little bit more of a rapid fire list of 5 things that I want to talk about, and I'll try to be a little quicker about them. So the first thing is investment. And, we're seeing in the news right now that our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has confirmed a very large amount. It looks like it's something like $1 billion that's going to be invested into Canadian sport, not just soccer, but Canadian sport. And, they're trying to capitalize on the success and the momentum and the positive energy, even from the coach, right, about this World Cup. And I think, that idea of investing in the sport, that's great. Okay. But again, we got to balance, just like I said earlier, right? We have to balance optimism with pragmatism. And this is what I'm going to say about investment. Okay. When you invest or give money to a business that is failing, all you do is prolong the eventual failure or death of that business. When you give money to people that aren't competent and don't know how to spend it, you end up wasting your money. So I'm concerned, and I think everyone in Canada in the game should be genuinely concerned about investment going to Canada Soccer, Ontario Soccer, the other provincial associations, okay, which when you get out of the national team and you start looking at everything else that's happening in the game, okay, I can tell you from personal experience, I have worked with and for these people for almost 20 years in my career. So I'm telling you straight up exactly how it is, because we have to make it make sense here, okay? Almost everybody that's in a leadership position in these organizations is incompetent. They are not capable of performing the responsibilities of the jobs that they have. Most of them got the jobs that they have, not because they deserved it, not because of meritocracy, but because of nepotism. We don't have a system with competent, capable, experienced, knowledgeable leadership that are able to implement changes that can actually help and make things better and develop players and educate coaches. We don't have that. And so, in fact, our problem right now, and the reason we're not developing more talented players and better decision makers and better coaches and all that, it's not money. It's not money. Our problem is competence. So if the money that is invested is going to go to the same system with the same people, it's wasted money and it's a wasted investment. The key is going to be, if we invest, we need to invest in better people. Without better people, without competent leaders, it doesn't matter how much money we pour at it. We're just pouring money down a money pit, and it's not going to change. So in keeping with that, the next thing that we got to talk about when I say where do we go from here is, we got to talk a little bit specifically about youth and the youth system. So again, I'll be a little bit brief, but there's been a huge debate online, both in Canada and the United States, about pay to play. Is it fair? Is it a good system? Is it the best system? Whatever. And, I know I've made these points before online, but I want to make it clear that in youth soccer anyway, pay to play, that means parents paying for their children to be in leagues and academies and extra training and all that, right? Pay to play is not the problem, and pay to play is never going to go away. We are never going to have completely free government subsidized soccer here. That's not going to happen, not with the number of players we have, not with, again, the environment, the culture. I'll get to a few other things in a minute, but pay to play is not the problem. The problem in youth soccer is gatekeeping. What we need to do is we need to remove the paywall that exists for talented players who could be good enough to play for professional MLS academies, the provincial programs, the national teams, whatever. Okay, the problem is now they've got a paywall where in order to be in those programs, they have to be in the expensive pay-to-play league. They have to be there. They can't get scouted or get identified outside of that league because it is a closed, gate-kept system. There's no meritocracy, there's no equity or equality there, and because of that, that's what's holding back our talent identification, okay? If we could make scouting and talent identification open to everyone, then I don't have a problem with pay to play. If people have a little bit more disposable income or whatever, they want to hire coaches, they want to go to a team and pay the coach more, in the end, that's okay. And ultimately, the reality is that coaches, I'm a coach myself, I have a business, we train athletes, none of us are going to want to work for free. There's a limit to what anyone is going to want to do for free, especially here in Canada with the way our economy is right now. So you can't be naive and just expect that you're going to get all these, quality, knowledgeable, experienced coaches that have sometimes spent tens of thousands of dollars on their own education and professional development. No one's going to invest that money, that time to become good and all the experience. And I don't want to go into the history of all the free work that I did or below minimum wage work too that I did in this game. Okay? We're not going to want to do that. No one's going to want to do that unless they believe they can at least make a living out of it and see some rewards for it. So pay to play isn't the problem. Gatekeeping is the problem. And we need to do something to eliminate and break down that paywall. Okay, so keeping it moving, where do we go from here in the professional and the senior professional game? Well, just like we need to eliminate gatekeeping and a closed system at the youth level, we need the same thing. We need an elimination of any gatekeeping. We need to eliminate a closed system at the professional level. That means Major League Soccer, the Canadian teams there. That means the CPL. That means even on the women's side, all of the professional leagues that we have in Canada, if we expect them to be able to develop players that are capable of playing professionally and capable of helping our national team do better, then they need to be consistently playing meaningful games under pressure. And the only way that you get consistent, meaningful games under pressure that looks anything like it would look anywhere else in the world, in other words, like the countries that we have to compete against when we're trying to develop players and compete internationally, the only way to do that is with promotion and relegation, okay? I'm a little bit skeptical about Major League Soccer because, not only is it a closed system, it's closed with almost no possibility of opening because it's a franchise model and the cost of the franchises is so high that it's just, I'm not sure how you could ever even encourage any type of investment or whatever without not having promotion and relegation. And frankly, I think that's a problem that's always going to be there. I also think it's a bit of a weird situation where we have so-called Canadian professional clubs, which essentially are just based in Canada, but they're franchisees. They're franchisees of the MLS model. That closed system, okay, there is no meritocracy. The teams that do well, sure, they can win the MLS Cup or whatever, but there's no chance for them to do anything higher other than the CONCACAF Champions League, nothing. And even worse than that, what you have is that the middle of the table back down to the bottom, they've got no consequences for losing. Okay, I've been in those environments. I've seen it firsthand. I know what it means when I say that, a game that is not meaningful, it isn't even just the game then that hurts you. It's all the week's preparation for the game. It's almost a waste of time. The players don't really care. The coaches don't really care. There's even these weird incentives where it's like, if you finish lower, maybe you end up with a better position in the draft or whatever. It's not as much of a problem in soccer as it is maybe in some other North American sports, but we can't have closed system here in North America and open system with promotion, relegation, and meritocracy everywhere else. We just can't do it. The players are not competing enough. They're not under pressure enough. They're not even playing enough games. That's a separate issue that maybe requires its own podcast, okay, because of the climate here, the shortened season, all of that, okay? We need meaningful games at the senior professional level, and we need to incentivize those players. We need to reward the winners, and we need to punish those that don't win. We need to punish the losers. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. I can't talk today about exactly how promotion relegation could be effectively implemented in Canada. That's, again, probably a topic for future podcast, okay? But I think involving, the League Ones and the semi-pro levels in it, maybe a little bit of expansion in the CPL, maybe some of this investment, it can go towards that type of model, okay? I don't have all the answers just yet, but we need to change that because if we don't, of course, we've got talent here. Our talented players, okay, they're going to go to Europe, they're going to go to the top clubs and they'll develop there and we'll be okay. But if we really want to get better, we got to take care of all those other players, the domestic professional players. We need to eliminate the closed system. We need promotion and relegation. Where do we go from here with regards to coaching? I'll keep this simple because I think I've made this point hundreds of times online already, but we need experts educating and training our coaches, or else the licenses, I don't care if it's called a provincial license, a Canadian license, a CONCACAF license, like it doesn't mean anything unless the instructors are experts. And what I mean by experts is, well, they have to be competent, they have to have knowledge, ideally knowledge that they gain at the highest possible level. They have to have experience working at that high level. That's the only way you get that knowledge. And they have to have a track record, a proven track record of success. I don't want to pay anything to take a coaching course where the instructor is someone who hasn't actually developed players successfully and who hasn't actually coached teams and had success with those teams at the highest level. That's what we have here now, coaching and teaching in our coach education courses. And that's why the level of coach education that we have here is so poor. And again, forget the national team. I mean, we're hiring foreign coaches anyway. Okay, below that, if we're going to keep putting Canadian coaches educated in Canada, we either raise the standard of our Canadian coach education or nothing is going to change, is not going to get better. The final point, where do we go from here before we wrap this up completely, okay? It's the chicken and egg problem with regards to Canadian soccer. This is back to that sort of colloquial expression, the cliche, which came first, the chicken and the egg. And again, I've made this point before, but I'll reiterate here, is that I think we have, a version of that problem here in Canada, which is fans. There's just been a study come out showing that soccer is the most popular sport in Canada. We've known for a long time that in terms of participation, it's not even close. I think we have more than 1 million players registered. So the sport is popular. Kids love to play it. People love to watch it. Okay. There's lots of interest in the sport, but there's not a lot of interest, almost no interest in Canadian domestic soccer. Yes, Toronto FC and some of the MLS clubs get a decent crowd sometimes, but those aren't even fans sometimes. Those are just people that want to go downtown, have a beer, have a good time. Okay, they're not really capturing that market. And then outside of the MLS, well, the fan support for our women's and men's domestic professional leagues overall, like, it isn't good enough. There's not enough people going to watch live, paying to watch. There's not nearly enough people watching it on TV and on One Soccer or wherever the streaming sites are. There's not enough interest. And if you start to ask people why they're not interested, you always hear the same thing. Well, they don't believe that the quality is good enough. They'll take some time out of their day to watch the Premier League. They'll watch the World Cup. Obviously, everyone watched it. But that fan support isn't translating to the Canadian domestic soccer because they don't think it's entertaining enough. It's not a high quality enough. And the reality is that because nobody's watching, well, then the advertisers that could be putting their commercials at halftime, putting their commercials at the hydration breaks, all of it, right? The advertisers don't want to invest. And because the advertisers don't want to invest, there's just not a lot of money in it for anybody. Again, I've worked in the USL. I've worked with 2 different clubs in the CPL. I know exactly how it goes. Everybody is functioning on a shoestring budget and they're all losing money. And I'm not talking a little bit of money. I'm talking millions because they have to pay everybody a full-time wage and they've got almost no revenue coming in. That revenue isn't going to come without advertisers. And the reality is the advertisers aren't going to want to spend the revenue unless they know people are watching. So there's the chicken and egg. What do we need? Do we need an investment? Do we need soccer to be put on TV and advertisers to pay first for the fans to come? Or do we need the fans to come first and show their support and show that there's hundreds of thousands of eyeballs or millions of eyeballs on the games, and then we get the investment and we get it put on TV? I think the argument or the answer to that question rather is I think we need a little bit of both. What does that mean in practical terms? Well, if you're a fan, you have to watch. You have to buy the membership to One Soccer. You have to take your kids to whatever it is. Halifax Wanderers, they got good attendance actually. Hamilton Forge, York United, or Inter Toronto, whatever they're calling themselves these days, whatever it is, right? You have to go and watch those games and invest a little bit of time and money, okay, in order to show that there's a demand for it. And then on the other side, both the advertisers and specifically the TV networks. Like TSN went all out for World Cup coverage, right? But then at the same time, you've got Canadian Championship games happening. You've got CPL games happening. They're not on TV. They're not on live, free TV. We need more of those games on live, free TV. And if they're promoted more, maybe then you get more eyeballs anyway. You get more people interested. So I think, honestly, it's not the chicken. It's not the egg. It's both. And we need a bigger commitment from both sides. If we don't, again, I'm not so sure that the domestic soccer can ever improve. And without the domestic professional soccer improving, we're going to have a hard time sustaining the success that we've had and building on it. So that wraps things up for the 2026 World Cup post-mortem here on Make It Make Sense. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to speaking with you next time.